All right, we can see here that there is obviously a grammar rule at play, right? It's clearly about punctuation. That's the only thing that's changing in the sentences. So we need to make sure we memorize certain punctuation rules. And the one that I'm drawn to first has to do with colons, because that's a much more concrete rule, right? Commas are kind of weird. We have different reasons to use different commas, and so I'd rather do something that's a little bit more cut and dry. And so what are the rules for a colon? Well, grammatically, right? So there's reasons we might stylistically use a colon, but grammatically, in order to use a colon, we need to have a complete sentence before the colon. After the colon, we have some options. We could have a sentence, we could have a list, or we can have just even one word is okay. So we've got options after, but this piece beforehand must be a complete sentence. So let's go to these choices and see. Do the ones that have colons start with a complete sentence? Well, choice B, the only thing before the colon is nonprofit enterprises. That is not a sentence. That is two words. That is a noun at best. So no, that is not a sentence. So that violates my grammar rule for colons. Done. Same thing with C, a little bit longer, but notice this couldn't stand alone. Nonprofit enterprises such as. Could I put a period right there? Because that's what a colon requires, that we could substitute with a period and have, a sentence that's completed beforehand. And that would not make any sense. Now, the reason people get this wrong and pick either B or C is that somewhere along the way you learned that a colon is for a list. And it is very often associated with lists, but it's not that every list gets a colon, right? There are certain situations where we would use one. And so one of the grammatical reasons we would do it is if the list were tacked on to a sentence that's already kind of complete. Here, though, it's kind of redundant to include a colon because the phrase such as is also associated with lists. So we're kind of starting a list with a such as. So we wouldn't also need a colon to start the list, right? That starting is already done. It's done with words, not with punctuation, but those two things function the same way. And so now our choice is much easier. Do we need this comma here? And the short answer, or the main piece of this is we don't know, actually. Such as could be an extra clause, right? A list can be kind of like part of a sentence, or it can be like an interruption of a sentence. So I don't know just by looking at these answer choices whether that comma is necessary or not. I need to look bigger picture now and start to think again about sentence structure. What is going on in the rest of the sentence? So we know the sentence starts with this, nonprofit enterprises. And we're debating whether or not we put a comma here. Well, if we did, then that would mean that something about the structure of the sentence is shifting. And in this case, that would be like an interruption. And so that's okay as long as we end the interruption somewhere. So let's scan the sentence. Where does the sentence continue? Nonprofit enterprises, such as the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, have begun to fill the void created by staff losses at newspapers and magazines. Notice there was no other punctuation in the sentence. But if I were to omit it, that's where I'd pick things up. Nonprofit enterprises have begun to fill the void created by staff losses at newspapers and magazines. That could be its own sentence, with this piece omitted, because it is extra. But because there's no comma here, we don't have the punctuation that shifts us back from the extra to the main sentence. So we can't put a comma here because we can't, basically a comma would be marking like us leaving the sentence. So if we're leaving the sentence with a comma, then we would need a second comma when we come back to the sentence to show your reader that this whole piece was an extra interruption. That would be okay grammatically. I have no problem with us doing that, but because this choice right here at the end has been made for us, we have to obey the decision made by the author originally. And so that's why we don't use a comma, because the author didn't use one at the end of this extra piece, so we're not going to use one at the beginning. And yeah, sometimes extra clauses won't get commas. It's tricky. There's lots of really, nitpicky rules that I don't want to go into about that. But the quick version is that there are certain cases where things must be a certain way, but there are other cases where authors make choices based on how they want the sentence to read or what they want certain clauses to mean. And so this is a case where the author could have gone one of two ways, commas or no commas. We would not know which one to pick unless we saw the way that the author's choice played out later on. And that does happen on the SAT, where sometimes we're tested on comma rules that are not hard and fast rules, but are more things that are subjective, that an author can choose to do or not to do. And when that's the case, if you feel like you're dealing with that kind of situation, look around, because odds are good that something else in the sentence or in the choices is going to force you to make put a comma somewhere, right? You personally, if you were writing, may have a choice. But because it's an SAT and there can't be multiple right answers, we know that the choice has to end one way. And so look around, okay? There's always a reason why the right answer has to be right, and we've got it right here. That's our reason. Memorize these rules, and you'll be more confident when you find the good reasons.